It's clear to me, you, this administration wants an uneducated electorate so that Mr. Trump and his courtiers can control thought, therefore control votes, and control the population. Why are you in this job at all if you don't have a dedication to the future of our children?
I, too, am a mother and a grandmother, and I want the best for my family going forward,
Vouchers.
for my grandchildren, for my great-grandchildren, and I hope to leave a legacy that we have established best practices for education that all the states can use.
Thank you, Secretary McMahon, for being here today. I want to start with the role of the Department of Education. I come at this as a mother, as a grandmother, a former teacher myself, a former state legislator with two grandmothers who were public school teachers. I have a lot of experience with the education system in Pennsylvania as well as the country. First, the history of the federal education involvement, and Ms. Watson-Coleman was getting at some of this that I'd like to build upon. Federal investments in education began to increase dramatically in the 50s and 60s and 70s, in tandem with the rise of the success of the civil rights movement. Americans finally began to recognize the vast inequalities in our education system. Thus, federal funding was used to improve education access for students from poor backgrounds, or minority students, for women, for people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. Finally, Congress established the Department of Education in 1979, replacing the Office of Education. Secretary McMahon, it's alarming that you and the President want to turn that clock back. You take us back to a time before any federal oversight of education, before many of the programs that guarantee free and equal access to education for all Americans. You said as much in your testimony. After all the Department of Education's work to ensure equal access to education, you're embarking on the department's final mission? You intend to put yourself out of a job? That's a little jarring to me. If you were a pediatric oncologist, I'd welcome that. Let's get you out of a job through cures, through healing, through ending of pediatric cancer. But ending a department that is supposed to oversee the education of our very youngest, to guide their future? Have you taken the time to educate yourself about this history? I'd encourage you to go ask students who attended school back then. Black students, brown students, students with disabilities, students from poor families. What was access like for them before the Department of Education? Frankly, eliminating the Department of Education, to me, is rather Orwellian. The President and his administration don't want an educated populace. Why don't we just go back to the book 1984 if it hasn't been banned? It's clear to me, you, this administration wants an uneducated electorate so that Mr. Trump and his courtiers can control thought, therefore control votes, and control the population. I'll note a secondary measure here that is going on. The increase in funding for charter schools. We know that charter schools originally were supposed to be incubators of the best ideas, great practices to be brought back into the public school education system so that every kid had an access to such things. But this administration and you, who want to put yourself out of a job, following the playbook, page 319 of Project 2025, first sentence, shutter the Department of Education. You're all following the book, that book. Too bad that one wasn't banned. And yet, privatizing is really the other ambition, an uneducated electorate and profit and privatization of our education system. Do you promise us that that isn't your ambition?
That clearly is not my ambition. I think I've stated that very well today.
Then why in God's name do you want to shutter it? Why don't you want to protect kids with disabilities? Why don't you want to protect kids who have been every decade denied equal access simply because of how much their parents make, the zip code they live in, the color of their skin? Why are you shuttering a department that's supposed to lift up those children?
Because those programs don't have to flow through the Department of Education, and they
can flow through the state. I was a state legislator. That's called shift and shaft. I've spoken with the governor of Pennsylvania. They can't pick up the tab anymore for education of our students. Not to mention, it would be inequitable by state, by state, by state. Why are you in this job at all if you don't have a dedication to the future of our children? Why are you in this job?
I, too, am a mother and a grandmother, and I want the best for my family going forward.
Vouchers.
For my grandchildren, for my great-grandchildren, and I hope to leave a legacy that we have established best practices for education that all the states can use. That would be a great legacy to be able to leave, to be able to show states these are some of the things that they can do. I think states have to look at their budgets.
Madam Secretary, the legacy you will be leaving is that I shut down the Department of Education. How we educate our children, determines not just their future, but our own.
But the
I think it's a
department-
sad legacy you will leave. I yield back.
The Department of Education is not educating anyone. Well, I can say this, and I will.
What you just witnessed between Congresswoman Madeleine Dean and Secretary McMahon is not just a tense exchange, it's a reflection of a much bigger battle over the future of education in America. Dean isn't just asking policy questions, she's raising alarms about what it would mean to dismantle the Department of Education altogether, and why that decision could fundamentally reshape the lives of millions of children for generations to come. To really grasp the weight of this, we have to step back into history. Before the Department of Education was created in 1979, education in America was deeply unequal. Black students in many states were forced into segregated schools. Students with disabilities were often excluded from classrooms entirely. And children from poor families, especially in rural or underfunded urban districts, received a drastically inferior education compared to wealthier peers. It was federal intervention, often driven by the civil rights movement, that started to change that picture. Programs like Title I for disadvantaged students, Title IX for gender equality, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act were hard-won reforms. They weren't handed out generously, they came after decades of struggle, protest, and legal battles. So when Dean hears Secretary McMahon and the administration talk about shutting down the Department of Education, it sounds like erasing all of that progress. She draws a sharp comparison. If a pediatric oncologist's goal is to cure cancer and put themselves out of a job, that makes sense.
Department of Education
But if the
in
Secretary of
1979,
Education's goal
replacing
is
the
to
Office of
abolish the very
Education.
department tasked
Secretary
with protecting children's right to learn,
it's
that
alarming
raises a
that you and
chilling
the
question.
president want to turn
Who
that
benefits
clock
from
back?
dismantling those
Take us back to a
protections,
time
and who gets
before
left
any federal
behind?
oversight of
Dean
education,
goes even
before
deeper,
many of
warning
the
that this
programs
isn't
that
just about
guarantee
cutting
free
red
and equal
tape or
access to
saving money.
education for all
It's
Americans.
about
You said as
control.
much in your
An
testimony.
educated
After all, the
populace is
Department of
harder to
Education's
manipulate
work to ensure
because
equal
knowledge
access
equips
to
people to
education,
question
you're
authority, to
embarking on
think
the
critically,
department's
and to
final
participate
mission?
meaningfully
You
in
intend to
democracy.
put yourself
By
out of
weakening
a
federal
job?
oversight, she
That's a little
suggests,
jarring to
you
me.
create an
If you
uneven
were
system
a
where some
pediatric
children thrive and
oncologist,
others are
I'd welcome
forgotten,
that.
and
Let's
where
get you out
ignorance
of a job
itself
through
becomes a
cures,
tool of
through
political
healing,
power.
through ending
That's why she
of
invoked
pediatric
Orwell's
cancer.
1984.
But ending
It
a
wasn't just a
department that
literary
is
flourish,
supposed to
it was a
oversee the
warning about
education
what
of our
happens
very
when information
youngest,
and education
guide
are
their
deliberately
future.
suppressed.
Have you taken the time to
Another
educate
crucial
yourself
part of
about
this exchange
history?
is
I'd
Dean's
encourage
point
you,
about
go ask students who
privatization.
attended school
Charter
back then.
schools were
Black
originally
students,
pitched
brown
as
students,
innovation
students with
hubs,
disabilities,
small-scale
students from poor
experiments that
families.
could test
What
new
was
teaching
access
methods
like
and
for
feed
them
successful
before
strategies
the
back into the
Department of
broader public
Education?
system.
Frankly,
But what we've
eliminating the
seen,
Department of
especially
Education
in
to
recent
me
decades,
is
is
rather
a shift
Orwellian.
toward using charter
The
schools
president
as a
and
way
his
to siphon
administration
public
don't
dollars
want
into
an
private
educated
management,
populace.
often without
Why
the
don't we
same
just go back to
accountability
book
or
1984
transparency.
if it hasn't been
When you
banned?
combine that
It's
trend
clear
with
to
the
me,
potential closure of the Department of
this
Education,
administration
you
wants
risk
an
creating a system
uneducated
where
electorate,
opportunity
so that
depends
Mr.
almost
Trump and his
entirely on a
courtiers
child's
can
zip
control
code,
thought,
their parents'
therefore
income,
control
or
votes,
whether they
and
happen to live
control
in a
the
state that
population.
chooses to
Well, note
prioritize
a
education.
secondary
That kind of
measure here that
inequity
is going
runs
on.
directly against
The
the
increase in
principles of
funding
equal
for charter
opportunity
schools.
this
We
country
know that
claims to
charter
stand
schools
for.
originally
And
were
then
supposed to
comes
be
Dean's most
incubators of
cutting
best
question.
ideas,
Why
great
are you in
practices
this
to be
job
brought
at
back into
all
the
if
public
you
school
don't believe in
education
the
system
mission of
so that
protecting
every
children's
kid
right
had
to
an access to
education?
such things?
That's more than
This
political theater.
administration
It's a
and
call
you
to
who want to put
accountability.
yourself out of a job,
Being
following
Secretary
the
of
playbook,
Education
page
isn't just about managing
319
budgets or
of Project
drafting policy
2025,
memos.
first sentence,
It's about
shutter
protecting the
Department of
future of the
Education.
nation's
You're all
children.
following the book.
Every
That
decision
book.
made in that
Too bad that
office
one wasn't
ripples
banned.
outward to classrooms,
And yet,
teachers, parents, and most
privatizing is
importantly,
really the other
students.
ambition.
If the
An
legacy left
uneducated
behind
electorate
is
and
dismantling the
profit and
very agency
privatization
charged
of our
with ensuring
education
equal
system.
access, history will
You
not be
promise
kind
us
in
that
its
that
judgment.
isn't your
This
ambition?
hearing reminds us of
Clearly
something
it's not my
fundamental.
ambition. I think I stated that
Education
very
is
well
not
today.
just another
And
line
why
item in a
in God's
budget.
name do you want to
It is
shutter
the
it? Why don't you
foundation
want
of
to protect
democracy,
kids with
the engine of
disabilities? Why don't
opportunity,
you want to
and the
protect
promise
kids
we make
who
to the
have been
next generation.
every decade
And yet, every
denied
time the
equal
Department of
access simply
Education is
because
targeted
of
for
how much their
elimination,
parents make,
what's
the zip
really on
code
the
they live
line
in,
isn't
the
a
color of their
bureaucratic
skin.
structure.
Why
It's
are you
whether
shuttering
we
a
as a
department
nation
that's
are
supposed to
willing to
lift up those
guarantee
children?
every child, regardless
Yes,
of
those
race,
programs don't have to
disability,
flow
or
through the
income,
Department of
a
Education,
fair
and
shot at
They can
success.
flow through the state.
And
I'm
this
a
is
state
where
leg- I was a
the
state
viewer,
legislator.
come in.
That's called shift
These
and
debates
shift.
may seem
I've spoken with the
abstract,
governor of
happening in
Pennsylvania.
Washington
They can't
far
pick up the
removed
tab
from daily
anymore.
life. but their
education of our
consequences will
students.
play out in
Not to mention,
classrooms
it
in
would
your
be
community,
inequitable
in the
by
futures
state,
of your
by state,
children
by state.
and grandchildren.
Why are
If
you
you
in
believe
this job at
education
all?
should be a
If
right,
you don't
not a
have a
privilege,
dedication
this is
to
a
the
moment to
future
pay
of our
attention,
children,
to
why
stay
are you in this
informed,
job?
and to raise your
I, too,
voice.
am a mother and a
Because
grandmother,
once protections are
and I want the
dismantled,
best
once
for my
oversight
family
disappears,
going
rebuilding
forward,
them is
Vouchers.
extraordinarily
grandchildren,
difficult.
for my
So
great-grandchildren,
ask yourself
and I hope
this:
to leave a
do we
legacy
want an
that we
America
have
where a
established
child's
best practices
destiny
for
is determined
education
by
that
the
all
zip
the
code they're
states
born
can use?
into,
That would be
or
a
one
great
where
legacy
every
to be able to
child has a
leave, to be
fair
able to show
chance to
states,
dream, to
these are some of
learn,
the
and
things
to
that they can
succeed?
do. I
That's
think
the
states
real
have to look
question
at their
behind this
budget.
hearing,
Secretary,
and
the
it's a
legacy
question
you will be
only
leaving
we,
is that I
collectively,
shut
can
down the
answer.
Department of